Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. A lot going on as we're getting closer and closer to the NBA offseason. We appreciate those of you who are subscribing to the channel. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and make sure you do turn on notifications as well. A lot of stuff coming up here in the NBA as everything gets closer and closer. Trades and free agent signing and all that. So make sure you stay in the know, subscribe, and turn on notifications. All right, today we're going to talk a little bit about Kemba Walker. Could he be on the move again? Already traded by the Boston Celtics to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Now there's a couple of teams that have been linked to him, and those two teams happen to share a city. Keith, are you ready to talk some Kemba?
I am, yeah. And let's remind everybody, like the video, give it a thumbs up there and like the video. That'll help us out quite a bit as well. So, yeah, Kemba Walker, the news reported by Zach Lowe. I think the way he worded it was the LA teams are going to sniff around acquiring Kemba Walker. And that makes sense. Both have a need for a point guard. We'll see what happens with Dennis Schroeder. We already recorded an entire video about Dennis Schroeder and Spencer Dinwiddie and their desires in free agency versus what might be more realistic for them. And then the Clippers side of it, what happens with Reggie Jackson? You know, we talked about how they're limited and what they can do to bring him back, and what that might look like. So it would make sense for both teams to acquire Kemba from a basketball standpoint. People are down on Kemba. The injury stuff is real. We don't know how much he'll make it through seasons or not. But I think the challenge or where it's gone too far on Kemba is that he's still a good player. He's still a 20-point per game scorer. Still a guy who can really run your offense, get you into stuff. Did quite well in that role with Boston the last couple of years. So it makes sense why these two teams that are title contenders would be looking at him to bring him in as kind of another piece to the puzzle.
Kemba is one of those classic examples of where sometimes we get so focused on a player's contract that we let that pollute how we see them in terms of as a basketball player, right? I mean, you look at guys who Andre Drummond is another example where at his 28 million or whatever he was making. Yeah, that's way too much, but people just assumed he just can't play basketball. Where if he was at $3 million, every team in the NBA would like to have him at $3 million. So it just depends on the contract sometimes in terms of how we view a player. And it's important to understand that the player on the floor and the contract are two separate things. And in Kemba's case, he is still a valuable on-court player, maybe not quite worth $36 million, but he's valuable out there on the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's at 36 million. That makes it kind of difficult, right? We saw Boston had to give up a first round pick and eat Al Horford's contract back to kind of get off Kemba Walker's deal. So let's break it down. What could these teams do to acquire him? Let's start with the Lakers. The base of any Lakers package has to be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Kyle Kuzma. Now, we're not saying the base of this talent reasons wise. This is all just math. This is salary matching in a trade because there's really no other way for the Lakers to get there. They can't put together the salaries that they need to if it's not Caldwell-Pope and Kuzma without getting really silly with signing trades. And that's not going to be how this comes together. Now, here's the challenge: is just those two alone, that still doesn't get you there. That leaves you about $3.5 million or so short. So I think what ultimately has to happen in that situation, if you're the Lakers, is you're going to have to send out a couple more deals. Now, the easiest way to get there is Alfonso McKinney and Marc Gasol. Not massive losses, right, for the Lakers. Gasol got back in the rotation by the end of the year, but McKinney, not a huge loss there. Right? He might be gone anyway if they need the roster spot. My challenge, if you go that direction, if you're the Lakers, as you know, Trevor, all that leaves you with left is on contract, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Kemba Walker. Now, you would still have Talon Horton-Tucker you could re-sign. You could re-sign Markieff Morris. We're assuming Montrezl Harrell will opt out. You could maybe do something there. I think you would almost have to at that point just to fill out your roster. Then you've got the oodles of veterans that you could sign to bring in. You could even do Wesley Matthews on a new contract designed around being a trade piece or something like that. But for me, the reason why I would shy away if I was the Lakers is you have very little depth. And then 2 of 3 of your star players that you need to be there have major injury issues with Walker and Anthony Davis. And as we've talked before, this isn't a criticism of LeBron James by any means, but Our over under for him is what, 70 games probably in a season. That's probably even a little on the high end in a regular season. And while regular seasons won't mean all that much to the Lakers, you don't want to be down in the 7-8 range and having to go through the play-in again. You want to be, 5-6 at the lowest, ideally more around probably 3-4. So that starts to become a little bit of a challenge if you're going to invest so much into three guys, because then you'd have Davis at 35, Walker at 36, and LeBron at 40 million plus. And that's as top heavy as we'll see anywhere outside of the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, and we've seen what can happen there. I mean, one or two injuries, like we saw with the Brooklyn Nets, we saw with the Lakers on a top-heavy team like that, and till the end, right? I mean, that's it. Yeah. And even if you're talking about, you bring back Alex Caruso, there's a few guys that you can put back onto the roster. But you're right. If you give up a lot to go get Kemba, well, that just might not be the best way to use your resources, because you're going to be left so thin elsewhere. And is Kemba the guy that really moves the needle? In addition to, is he the guy that you want alongside Anthony Davis long term? Remember, that's something the Lakers have to keep in mind whenever they're making these moves. Not just, can this player help us right now, but does this player fit Anthony Davis's timeline? Because at some point, LeBron James is going to sail off into the sunset. It's going to be Anthony Davis's team, and you've got to have pieces alongside him that are going to fit. I don't know if Kemba is going to have the longevity to be that kind of a player.
Yeah, at some point after you and I retire from doing this, then LeBron will finally retire as a player. Probably after a near MVP season, and but yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, you have to be really cautious if you're Rob Pelinka the way you build this team out this year, because you can't put yourself in the same situation you're in this year, where you're really overly relying on two or three guys. That just that's a recipe for disaster. Now, if we cross town, and look at the Clippers, they can do it a little bit differently because they're built a little bit differently, the way their roster is built. They could do Patrick Beverley and Luke Kennard as the base of their package. And then what they could do is, add in another smaller salary there that can get them there to be where they need to go to get a guy like Kemba. And I think, again, we're not talking talent. We're just talking salary matching wise. The other thing with the Clippers, though, is that makes it really difficult is they already owe all their picks to OKC. We've gone through it before, but if we go through it again, what we basically come up with is, other than this year and 2027, every pick either goes to OKC or it's a swap with OKC already. So that's really hard to work around. Yeah, you could give them this year's pick, because if we remember, once you're past the draft, you can always trade that pick. So what they could do is arrange this pick. They could draft for them at the draft and then make this trade at some point in the next offseason, or shortly after the draft, whatever it is. Because as soon as you make the pick, those future obligations now only look forward for being able to trade in back-to-back years. It never looks backwards. So I think what we're ultimately looking at there with the Clippers is, you could do that, and they can retain more depth than the Lakers have, just because they already have it. You'd still have Kawhi, because presumably if you're making this kind of move, you think you're re-signing Kawhi. Right. You're going to have Paul George. This could be a big way to tell Kawhi too, hey man, we're doing this, around you. We're going to make this happen. And then you'd still have Zubac, you'd have Serge Ibaka, you'd have Marcus Morris. So you'd have your basically your fleshed out roster. Then you'd be in the same position as the Lakers are, with filling out via the taxpayer mid-level, going to get guys on minimums and the like, and that they would be able to do this just a little bit easier than the Lakers are, because they're not quite so top heavy and relying on depth.
Now look, both teams have a path to get there financially. But is this really a move that you want to make in terms of on the basketball court? I guess you can probably make an argument for the Clippers a little bit better than the Lakers, but I would think option A for both of these clubs, rather than surrender assets in order to go get Kemba, would just be to keep the guys that you've got. Keep Reggie Jackson, keep Dennis Schroeder, and then use those assets. If you decide, hey, we really do want to trade Luke Kennard, or we really do want to trade Kyle Kuzma, great. Use those guys in other ways, because I don't think the difference between Kemba and Schroeder or Kemba and Reggie Jackson is the same as those assets would suggest. Like, you'd be better off keeping the player and the asset rather than sacrificing all of those things in order to go get a Kemba Walker, at least in my mind.
Yeah, I'm with you on that end, especially if we assume the Reggie Jackson we saw in the latter half of the regular season and into the
Oh
playoffs
yeah,
is the Reggie Jackson we can expect.
he
And
was
and we
incredible.
do have history of that, right? That's the guy he was in Detroit for a while. So we have some history of that. So that part I'm not as skeptical on, I guess, as some others, seem to be. Yeah, he's not going to be out there scoring 30 points a game, but you also don't need that, But I'm with you. I think the difference between what you're going to have to pay either one of those guys and Kemba, plus what you'd give up to trade for him, because at that point too, now you're out. If you're the Lakers, you've now traded everything you can trade.
Right.
If you make this deal, there's nothing left. At that point, you're talking about retrading Walker or Davis or James, and that's not going to happen. So you're really, if you do that, you're locking in. That's your team. You've got very little options there. You almost then at that point have to re-sign Wesley Matthews to the best contract you can give him, just so you have him as trade ballast in a move. And I don't like looking at players that way, but you almost have to. You have to try to convince Harrell to re-sign or pick up his player option just again so you can trade him later. Same thing with Horton Tucker. Maybe even give him a bigger contract than you want to, just so you can trade him later down the line. That's where all those things become, really, really kind of complicated and become complicating factors. So I guess where I would leave it is I'm out if I'm the Lakers. I do not do this. This doesn't make sense to me. I don't think it's going to make you better enough than some of the other things you could do. If you're the Clippers, maybe. I don't see giving up Beverly as being all that big of a sacrifice for them. I would especially do it too if you could still re-sign Reggie Jackson, which it's only money at that point, and Steve
Yep.
Ballmer certainly has plenty of it, right? He could
He's
could
not
write a
worried about
hundred
that.
million. Yeah, right. He could be 100 million over luxury tax and write that check because you know what? He just made $100 million, right? He's fine. He's never even going to see it. So that's where I think if you do that's not the worst move in the world. Kennard, yeah, that's all right. Question is if you're OKC, can either one of these teams pay you enough? I guess
Right.
Kuzma would make sense for OKC if it was the Lakers side because you're getting a youngish player. You could, he's going to get a million shots there. Maybe you rebuild his value, build him into something. He kind of matches SGA's timeline a little bit. Caldwell Pope would be a guy I would assume they'd turn immediately around and flip him in another trade for something. On the Clippers side, Kennard, again, kind of like Kuzma, young enough. You could put him out there with Dort and SGA and let him shoot a whole bunch and do his thing. Beverly probably either buy him out or you move him on in another deal. But it's what are you going to get a first round pick out of those guys that's either so far in the future you can't even see it, or is it going to be a first round pick that's more recent but not very good? That starts to get a little messy from the OKC side. So I think all around we don't see him go to either team unless it's really gets silly from the Lakers or Clippers side where they start arranging a way to send more picks and other things that we don't expect. And I don't know how either one of them would do it with all the picks that they're already obligated to pay out.
Yeah, it's really hard to find a way for this to actually work for either side. And again, maybe it's a little easier for the Clippers, but I just don't know. Is Kemba Walker that guy right now that you're going to bend over backwards? You're going to
Yeah.
move mountains in order to bring him to your. There's some players where that answer is yes, no question, right? Like
Sure.
Damian Lillard, if he really hits the trade market,
Oh,
teams will do
100%.
whatever it takes. Kemba
Yeah.
Walker is not that guy. Now, if he comes with a DeLorean and you can rev that sucker up to 88 miles per hour and you go get Kemba Walker from 4 years ago, sure, but that you're
But
betting
if
on him
if it
becoming
was
that
that Kemba
again.
Walker, he wouldn't even be on
He
OKC,
would be a
right?
Celtic.
Boston would have
Yes,
kept them themselves and just
absolutely.
moved merrily moved along their way and did what they had hoped would be all along. So yeah, that's that. You're right, man. That's the challenge there. It becomes very very hard to evaluate that. And I just and even if you're the Clippers, Paul George's health track record isn't
That's
always
true.
the greatest. Kawhi, we know, is going to miss games. I really struggle to invest 35 plus million in three guys that I don't know that they're going to be there, all the time for me, especially late in the season. That's boy, can you imagine if you do that and then you get to the end of the year and you don't have them? That's a complete disaster.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a big problem. If you get to the playoffs and I mean, we've seen, right? Like the NBA finals. I think the teams who are getting to the NBA finals this year would not be there if everyone was healthy. And again, that's not a shot at the Suns or either, the Bucks
Huh,
or the Hawks
sure.
at all. I'm just I think that's fairly realistic to say that most likely those would not be the teams in the finals if everyone was healthy. And again, things that happen, and all credit in the world to those teams. They beat the teams that are in front of them. But health in the playoffs, if we've learned anything from this season, it's that it matters a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, fit wise, if this is the direction either team goes, it works great because Kemba has learned how to play off the ball over the last few years, playing with the Celtics with Tatum, Brown, and Hayward. 2 years ago, and then Tatum and Brown last year. You would do a lot of that with both the Clippers or the Lakers. So fit wise, pretty good. He's a better defender than he gets credit for because he's a very willing defender. He will actually really go out there and try all the time, that's a big part of defense is just putting in effort.
It sounds so terrible when we say it
I
that way.
know.
Like you just have
But
to
it's so
try.
true.
But it is true.
It is true, yeah. But he's not any worse than Dennis Schroeder is, I don't think, defensively. Not that neither one of them sniffing an all defense team anytime
But they put in the effort.
He's definitely worse than Beverly is, but there's good defender, dirty player. That's a pretty fine line that he walks quite often. So I'm not so sure. I've already shared my thoughts on that again. So we won't dive back into that one. But yeah, I think that this is something that both teams are better served looking elsewhere. If this is a year from now and Walker gets back to form and looks pretty good for OKC, then you can really approach it. But then it gets even more difficult because now it turns into 37 plus million of expiring salary and all that stuff. But it's expiring salary. You can maybe make something work there. But right now, walk away. There's no reason for either one of these teams to necessarily do this.
Yeah. OKC will move him somewhere, but I don't think it makes a lot of sense of the Los Angeles team to be landing spot. So we'll see. Maybe they rehab his value and they're able to flip him for even more draft picks. At some point, Sam Presti is going to fulfill his goal and have picks 1 through 30 in the first round of some draft. At some point, it seems like it's just inevitable. It's going to happen.
Might be. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me.
All right, everybody, give us your thoughts on Kemba Walker, though. Should the Lakers or the Clippers, as Zach Lowe suggested, trade for him? Is this a player that you think they should go after? Obviously, we were more on the negative side of whether or not they should do it, but give us your thoughts in the comments down below. Don't forget to subscribe right here to the NBA Front Office YouTube channel. And again, turn on those notifications. And of course, like this video as well. Until next time, everybody, safe and see you.